Namaste, everyone, and welcome to the Ramayana Odyssey, where we take the time to journey through the timeless story of the entirety of the Ramayana and take the time to reflect on what it means for our lives today. So, in this series, we first listen to the story and then we pause to reflect on what it means about Dharma, character, relationships, leadership, and our lives in our own time, in our modern day world. But along the way, we're also going to be joined by various learned teachers and thoughtful voices who can help us understand these stories with greater depth. So, in our previous story, we witnessed one of the most sacred and inspiring moments in the entirety of the Ramayana, specifically in the life of Maharshi Valmiki. After the sorrowful event on the banks of the Tamasa River, where the shloka first emerged from his heart, Valmiki returned to his ashrama filled with questions. Why had those specific words come out of his mouth with such force? Why had his sorrow taken the form of a poem? Why had a moment of grief become something so rhythmic, so powerful, and so unforgettable? And then, while he was situated in this deep sense of stillness, Brahmaji appeared before him. Brahmaji then revealed that Valmiki was not merely meant to be a poet. Rather, he was to become the seer through which whom the life of Rama would be preserved for the world to see. He then instructed Valmiki directly to compose the sacred and beautiful story of Rama in the form of shlokas. He assured him that nothing in this great work would be false. Every single thing concerning Rama, Sita, Lakshmana, Bharata, and all of the others in the story, both known and unknown, would be revealed to him by his divine grace. And Brahmaji blessed the Ramayana with the words that would echo through as long as the mountains stand upon the earth and the rivers continue to flow. The story of Ramayana shall live among humanity. So that very night, Valmiki remained seated in stillness, filled with absolute peace, humility, sacred inspiration, and divine responsibility. He had been chosen. He had been blessed. He had been entrusted with a work that would live for ages to come. And that's where our story will begin today. Dawn came very quietly to the hermitage. The night that had held Valmiki in stillness slowly began to withdraw. The stars softened one by one. A pale light touched the edge of the forest, and the world seemed to awaken without any sound, as though it was unwilling to disturb the silence that rested around the sage. The sacred fires, which had burned low throughout the entire night, now glowed faintly in the early morning air. Valmiki remained seated in the exact same position. His body remained still. His breath was quiet, but within him, the night had not ended as ordinary nights would have. The words of Brahmaji continued to live in him. As long as the mountains stand upon the earth and the rivers continue to flow, the story of Ramayana shall live amongst humanity. Those words in specific had not faded with the divine radiance. They remained in place, not just as a memory, but more so as a responsibility. Valmiki slowly opened his eyes to the morning light. The hermitage before him was very familiar. After all, he'd lived there for so long. The trees, the pathways, the sacred fires, the disciples moving softly in the distance. Yet, at the same time, everything seemed to have changed completely. Not because the material world itself had changed, but rather because something within him had just been awakened. The questions that had once troubled him, besides the tamasa, were now gone. The sorrow of the bird, the force of the shloka, the appearance of Brahmaji, the command to compose the life of Rama, each of them had found its place within a larger order. What had first appeared as grief had become grace at this point. What had first appeared as a curse had become a doorway to something much bigger. What had first appeared as a disturbance had become the beginning of a sacred work. Valmiki lowered his gaze in quiet reverence. He did not feel the excitement of one that was beginning a great achievement. Rather, he felt the humility of one entrusted with something greater than himself. The life of Rama was not to be imagined. It was to be seen. It was not to be shaped by preference. Rather, it was to be received in absolute truth. It was not to just become poetry just to admire. It was to become poetry through which Dharma could live in the hearts of those that read it. Slowly, Valmiki rose. The earth beneath his feet was cool, with the softness of dawn. The air carried the fragrance of leaves, river mist, and sacred smoke. Somewhere beyond the hermitage, the tamasa continued to flow, calm and clear, as though it too remembered what had begun upon its bank. Valmiki walked with measured steps towards the place of morning worship. There was no haste within him. There was no uncertainty. Only a deep inward feeling of readiness remained. He performed atamana with reverence, a sacred act of sipping and touching water to purify body, speech, and mind before any kind of worship. Each movement was very simple, yet filled with some sacred attention. He then seated himself upon the kusha grass. The morning light fell very gently around him. With folded palms, Valmiki remembered Brahmaji. He remembered Narada. He remembered Rama. And then slowly, he allowed his mind to become still. The sounds of the hermitage softened around him. The rustling leaves, the distant footsteps of the disciples walking around, the murmur of the river, the calls of the waking birds, as though the world itself was making space for what was about to unfold. Valmiki's breath grew very quiet. His awareness deepened. The stillness that had descended upon him the previous night returned once more. Not empty, not lifeless, but actually the opposite. Luminous and alive. And within that stillness, by the grace of Brahmaji and the power of his tapas, the life of Rama began to reveal itself before him. At first, it didn't appear just as a story. It came as a light, softly, silently, like dawn spreading across the inner sky of his awareness. Within that light, forms began to emerge. Valmiki saw Ayodhya, not as a distant city that was merely described by Narada, but as a living reality before him. He saw King Dasharatha, the royal household, and the birth of Rama. He saw Rama grow in absolute grace, strength, humility, and self-mastery. He saw Lakshmana by his side, inseparable in love and in service. He saw Bharata and Shatrughna, noble and gentle, bound to their brothers through affection and duty. The vision continued to move forward. He saw sage Vishwamitra arrive in Ayodhya. He saw Rama and Lakshmana enter the forest, protect the sacrifice, and continue towards Mithila. He saw the great bow of Shiva, the strength with which Rama lifted it, and the sacred union of Rama and Sita. He saw absolute love, beauty, and Dharma quietly joining together. Then the vision flowed like a sacred river. He saw Ayodhya rejoice in the hope of Rama's coronation. He saw exile enter that joy like a shadow that came out of nowhere. He saw Rama leave the kingdom without any anger. He saw Sita follow him with unwavering devotion. He saw Lakshmana walk beside them in service and absolute love. He saw the forests, the sages, the rivers, the simplicity of their life, and the sorrow of separation when Sita was taken by Ravana. The vision did not turn away from grief. Valmiki very clearly saw Rama's pain. He saw Lakshmana's anguish. He saw Sita's strength in captivity. He saw Hanuman, devotion given a literal form, cross the ocean, enter Lanka, and bring hope to Sita between the Ashoka trees. He saw the bridge rise across the ocean. He saw the battle in Lanka unfold. He saw Ravana's and he saw Rama's return to Ayodhya. And then he saw the kingdom ruled with absolute justice, restraint, compassion, and truth. But the vision didn't only show the events that actually happened on the outside. By Brahmaji's grace, Valmiki saw what was known and what was hidden. He saw the words that were spoken aloud and the sorrows that were carried silently. He saw the movements of everyone's hearts, the choices that were made in pain, and the subtle ways in which Dharma moved through every single moment of Rama's life. What Narada had spoken in brief now unfolded before him in absolute fullness. Valmiki remained absorbed. The hermitage around him remained absolutely still. The morning light continued to spread gently across the world outside. But within him, the life of Rama had already become present, clear, complete, and alive. A deep stillness moved through Valmiki's body. The hairs on his skin rose in wonder. This was not merely the Rama he had heard about from Narada. This was Rama revealed to him in his true form. Rama as a son, brother, husband, warrior, king, and protector. Rama who lived Dharma, not when it was convenient, but when it demanded everything. Rama who accepted joy without any attachment, sorrow without bitterness, responsibility without pride, and sacrifice without turning away. Valmiki found himself bowing inwardly, and in the silence of his heart, he saluted Rama. The greatness he had just glimpsed now stood before him without any comparison. The Rama he knew after this vision was far deeper, far vaster, and far more luminous than the Rama he had previously understood. Quiet sense of gratitude arose within him. He thanked Ishvara for choosing him, not because he felt worthy, but because grace had made him an instrument. He understood then that he had not been called merely to remember. He had been called to give from what he had seen. He had been called to give form to what he had seen. And from that understanding, inspiration instantly rose within him like a sacred flame. The vision slowly began to settle. The luminous scenes that had just moved through Valmiki's awareness did not disappear. They remained within him, clear, ordered, and alive, as though Rama's life had been placed upon the altar of his heart. For a long while, Valmiki didn't move. The world outside was now awake. The hermitage had begun to start its morning routine. Disciples moved along slowly on the pathways. But within Valmiki, another current had begun to move. It was not restlessness. It wasn't excitement either. It was inspiration at its purest form. The words of Brahmaji returned to him with quiet force, composed this sacred and delightful story of Rama in the form of shlokas. Valmiki lowered his gaze. The moment at the Tamasa river rose again before him. The grieving bird, the arrow, the sudden cry, and the words that had emerged from him without any effort. Until now, he had wondered why sorrow had taken that form. Now, he completely understood that shloka had not been an end. It had rather been a beginning. The rhythm born from compassion beside the river had become the path through which Rama's life would be carried into the world. Valmiki sat in stillness, and the first movements of composition began to arise. He didn't feel like a poet searching for words. He felt like a witness receiving the truth after so long, in its absolute fullness. And the shlokas began to take shape, not forced, not invented, but flowing from the vision that had been revealed through grace. Each word carried weight. Each line demanded purity. Valmiki felt responsible of it in every part of his being. This was not merely poetry. This was Rama's life. This was Sita's sorrow and strength. This was Lakshmana's service. This was Bharata's devotion. This was Hanuman's surrender. This was Dharma moving through joy, exile, conflict, grief, victory, and sacrifice. How could such a story be spoken carelessly? How could one word be allowed to distort what had been revealed so gracefully? Valmiki's heart became very humble. Again and again, he turned inward before the words arose. Let this be truthful. Let this be worthy. Let this carry Dharma without pride. The shlokas began to flow. The meter that had first appeared through sorrow now moved with absolute purpose. Line followed line. Rhythm held meaning. Feeling entered form. Memory became music. Vision became poetry. As Valmiki composed, he lived the story inwardly. Every shloka carried not only what had happened, but what had been endured. Every single verse held not only action, but meaning. The Ramayana was beginning to take form, not as a tale shaped by imagination, but as a sacred vision, arranged in the language of Valmiki's heart. The life of Rama had entered Valmiki's silence. Now it was entering sound. Days passed within the hermitage. Perhaps more than days. Time itself seemed to lose its ordinary measure as Valmiki continued the sacred work across time. The sun rose and set. The fires were lit and tended to. The seasons moved gently through the forest. Disciples came and went with reverence, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding in the stillness of their teacher. The life of Rama flowed into sargas and khandas, each section carrying its own rhythm, meaning, and beauty. What had been revealed in vision now became a great poem, vast enough to hold kingdoms and forests, battles and silences, vows and tears, love and renunciation. The Ramayana finally took shape. 24,000 shlokas arose. Each one rested completely upon the truth. Each one carried the power of what had been seen. The sacred work became both beautiful and beneficial. It's delightful to hear, profound to contemplate, and capable of guiding humanity across generations. Valmiki did not look upon the growing work with pride. He looked upon it with wonder instead. There were moments where he paused when writing, overwhelmed by the grace that had allowed such a composition to pass through him. He knew that the strength was not his alone. The vision that had been granted, the form had been blessed, the words had been protected by Brahmaji's assurance. Not a single word of yours in this sacred work shall prove untruthful. That blessing remained with him. It guarded his mind. It steadied his speech. It reminded him that he was not the owner of the Ramayana, but its instrument. At last, the sacred poem stood complete. The life of Rama had been composed in measured verse. The grief of separation, the beauty of devotion, the courage of sacrifice, the complexity of Dharma, the tenderness of love, and finally, the majesty of righteousness had all found their place within. Valmiki sat before the completed work in deep silence. He felt a lot of things. He felt gratitude. He felt humility. He felt awe. What had begun as sorrow beside the tamasa had become the Ramayana. But as he sat in silence, another thought arose within him. A scripture is not meant to remain hidden. A sacred story is not meant to live only in the memory of the sage who composed it. It must be heard. It must be sung. It must travel from heart to heart. The Ramayana now had form, yes, but it still needed a voice. It had to be carried by voices that were pure enough to preserve its truth, disciplined enough to hold its form, and finally sensitive enough to express its heart. Now, who could carry such a work? Who could learn not only the shlokas, but also the spirit within them? Who could sing Rama's life without pride, without distortion, without losing at the tenderness and the gravity of what had been revealed? The question rested in Valmiki quietly. He chose not to search outside in haste. Rather, he waited, for the same grace that brought the Ramayana through him would also reveal how it should enter the world. In the hermitage, life continued with simple beauty. Young students moved through their daily disciples. Their voices rose and faded throughout the trees like gentle offerings carried by the morning air. Among them were two boys, Lava and Kusha. They lived in the ashrama under Valmiki's care, growing in discipline, purity, and quiet strength. Their movements were gentle, their minds were attentive, and their hearts naturally were drawn towards sacred learning. They were very young, but there was something uncommon within them. Their faces carried innocence, yet their presence held dignity beyond their years. Their speech was clear. Their memory was sharp. Their conduct was noble. When they learned, they absorbed not only the sound of the words, but the feeling behind them. And their voices were sweet. There was a natural music in them, not merely pleasant to the ear, but also capable of carrying emotion with absolute purity. When they chanted, the sound didn't ever feel forced. It rose from them with simplicity, clarity, and devotion. Valmiki observed them with quiet attention. At first, he watched without speaking. He saw how they sat before their teacher with folded hands. He saw how carefully they pronounced each and every syllable. He saw how their minds did not wander when these sacred words came from them. He saw how humility and alertness lived together in them. Slowly, a sense of recognition began to arise within him. Perhaps the Ramayana had not only found its form, perhaps it had also found its first voices. Valmiki looked upon Lava and Kusha with deep tenderness. To the world, they were young students of the hermitage. But hidden beneath that simplicity was a destiny only known to time. They were the sons of Rama and Sita. Though Rama did not know that they lived, and the world did not yet know the role that they would play, the sacred story of Rama, born from absolute compassion, revealed through grace, and composed through tapas, was now ready to be entrusted to the hearts that were capable of carrying it. Valmiki understood that the next step of the Ramayana's journey would not begin in a palace, a court, or a public assembly. It would begin right here, in the quiet of the ashrama, between a sage and the two young students that were entrusted with this. Between the one who had seen Rama's life and the two voices through which that life would be one day sung to the world. Valmiki called Lava and Kusha near. The two boys came quietly and stood before him with folded hands. Their eyes held the alertness of students ready to receive, and their faces carried the innocence of children who did not yet know the full weight of the destiny that was resting upon their shoulders. Come, Valmiki said gently. The boys sat before him. The hermitage around them was very quiet. Valmiki began. At first, he did not teach them the entire story. He gave them the sound, the measure, the rhythm, the movement of the shloka. He took the time to teach them how each syllable had to be held with care, how each line had to flow into the next, how the beauty of the verse depended not only on sound, but on direct attention. Lava and Kusha listened. They repeated. Their young voices rose softly in the stillness of the ashrama. At first, the shlokas were new to them. The words carried the dignity of sacred poetry, and the rhythm required discipline. But the boys learned with patience. They listened carefully, repeated faithfully, and allowed the music of the verse to settle into their memory. Valmiki watched them. He corrected them gently when a syllable was rushed. He guided them when the rhythm lost its balance. He showed them where the voices should become soft, where it should become firm, where it should carry grief, where it should carry wonder, and where it should rest in devotion. He didn't teach them sound alone. He taught them meaning as well. When they recited the birth of Rama, he taught them to feel the joy of Ayodhya. When they took the time and recited Rama's exile, he taught them to understand the silence of sacrifice. When they recited Sita's journey into the forest, he taught them to recognize courage wrapped in tenderness. When they recited Hanuman's leap across the ocean, he taught them to recognize that devotion becomes strength when the heart is surrender. When they recited the battle in Lanka, he taught them that victory is not merely the defeat of an enemy, but rather the restoration of Dharma. And when they recited Rama's rule, he taught them that true kingship is not power held for oneself, but responsibility carried for the welfare of all. The boys listened with their full attention directed on their teacher, and slowly, the Ramayana began to enter them, not merely into memory, but into feeling, into breath, into the quiet spaces of their hearts. Days passed. The teachings continued beneath the trees, near the sacred fires, in the calm spaces of the ashrama, where learning was not rushed and the wisdom was not forced. Lava and Kusha learned verse after verse. Their memory became steady. Their pronunciation became absolutely clear. Their rhythm became natural. The shlokas no longer seemed to sit outside of them as lessons to be repeated. They began to move through them like almost something that was remembered from within them. Valmiki noticed the change. When they sang of Rama, their voices carried such reverence. When they sang of Sita, their voices softened with compassion. When they sang of Lakshmana, they carried loyal. When they sang of Bharata, they carried absolute devotion. And when they sang of Hanuman, their voices rose with strength and humility together. And finally, when they sang of Dharma, there was a quiet seriousness in them beyond their years. Sometimes, when they sang of Rama, a joy arose in them that they could not explain. When they sang of Sita, their voices softened with a tenderness deeper than understanding alone could help. But they did not know why these names felt so close to them in their hearts. They only knew that when they sang of Rama and Sita, something from within them became very still, bright, and full. At times, from a quiet distance, Sita heard their young voices carrying the story of Rama. She didn't interrupt them. She instead listened in silence, her heart moving through memories known only to her. The world did not yet know who the boys were, but she knew. And as they sung of Rama with such innocence and devotion, her eyes filled, not with sorrow alone, but a love too deep for words. The ashrama began to listen. At first, a few disciples paused when the boys recited. Then others gathered quietly beneath the trees. Even the ordinary sounds of the hermitage all began to grow softer when Lava and Kusha began to sing. The crackling of the sacred fires, the movement of leaves, the footsteps of students, the call of the birds, all of them seemed to make space for the Ramayana. Their voices were young, yet extremely pure, simple, yet extremely powerful, sweet, yet filled with meaning. They didn't sing to impress anyone. They sang as if serving something sacred. Valmiki listened to the boys with deep stillness. The Ramayana that had arisen in his heart now lived in their voices. The story that had come through a divine vision found a human sound. What Brahmaji had entrusted to him was no longer resting only within him and the words he had composed. It had begun to move. One day, after the boys had completed a long recitation, silence settled around them. Not a soul spoke, and the final notes seemed to remain in the air, touching the trees, the earth, the river, and the hearts of all who had listened. Valmiki looked at Lava and Kusha with his heart filled with quiet joy. They had learned the words. They had understood the rhythm. They had absorbed the meaning. That more than that, they had become worthy carriers of the story. Through them, the Ramayana could travel beyond the hermitage. Through them, Rama's life could be heard by the entire world. Through them, Dharma could move from heart to heart. Valmiki lowered his gaze in gratitude. The journey that had once begun with a cry beside the tamasa had now reached another sacred turning point. Sorrow had become shloka. Shloka had become Ramayana. And now, through the voices of Lava and Kusha, the Ramayana was ready to enter the world. And that is where we will pause for today. So, in this story, we really saw how Maharshi Valmiki did not merely compose a poem. He received a vision, shaped it into shlokas, and then entrusted it to pure young voices, Lava and Kusha. The Ramayana had now found its first singers. That the journey of the Ramayana was only just beginning at this point. In our next episode, we're going to be seeing how Lava and Kusha carry this sacred sound beyond the quiet space of Valmiki's ashrama. Their voices will begin to move hearts. The story of Rama will travel from the forest towards Ayodhya. And eventually, the Ramayana will be sung before Rama himself. Take a minute to imagine that moment. Rama, the very person whose life had become the song, will hear his own story from the voices of two young boys that just happen to be his sons. And the world will slowly begin to realize who these boys truly are. And this is the powerful story that is waiting for us in our next episode. So thank you all so much for joining us in the Ramayana Odyssey. If this is a journey that is meaningful to you, please take a moment and subscribe to the Project Self YouTube channel and take a minute to follow the Ramayana Odyssey on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Please do also share this episodes with your family, your friends, children, and literally anyone who would like to understand the Ramayana. Not only as like an ancient story, but rather as a living guide for all of us today. At Project Self, our mission is to bring the wisdom of the Ramayana, Bhagavad Gita, Vedanta, and India's sacred traditions into today's world in a way that is authentic, meaningful, and accessible. When you take the time to subscribe, share, comment, and support this work, you become part of that mission. You directly help us carry this wisdom to more hearts, more homes, alongside the next generation. So let's end with this thought. A story becomes sacred when it awakes Dharma within us. And when Dharma finds the right voice, it doesn't remain in the past. It enters the world again. It enters our homes. It enters our hearts. And it really guides the way we live. Jai Shri Ram.